Good morning.
Please.
What's that?
I'm new to the class, so
Oh.
just wanted to introduce to everyone. My name is Mahmoud. I decided, I'm late. I'm really late, but I decided to take 4 subjects of this one. My name is Mahmoud. I'm from Syria,
Yeah.
and I'm since 5 months here in Vancouver. I'm looking forward to
Great. Great. Welcome. Have a seat. All right. Let's see. Let's see where we are here.
It's okay to use the phone also.
It is. Yep, it is. Okay. Can we start? Are we ready? Sophie, all ready? Cool. Yo-yo, you ready?
Yeah.
Cool. Ben, Mahmoud, Shota, Kenan, Daniel, Jim. Jim, you ready to go? Okay, here we go. All right. So, welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Tuesday, even though it feels like Wednesday. So we're good morning. So, what was I going to say? I don't know. What do you want to talk about? Anything? Okay. All right. Here we go. Just so happens I have something to talk about, and it's the Treaty of Versailles, right? So yesterday I had you read a couple sections of the textbook, and they kind of just described a little bit about how the war was going and how it kind of came to an end, right? And so we said that this conflict was a war of attrition. And what did that mean, attrition?
Fighting till someone gives up.
Yeah, kind of like just wearing people down, right? Or wearing the other side down. And so just persistently kind of chipping away at them until finally they cannot go on, right? And again, Germany is getting to that place, right? Because their allies have kind of fallen apart, right? The Ottoman Empire has fallen apart. Eventually, that or most of that or part of that section of the world will reconstitute itself as Turkey, but not yet. So that's kind of fallen apart. The Austro-Hungarian Empire has kind of fallen apart as well. So it's kind of only Germany, right? And they're not, as it turns out, they're not really capable of producing quite as much as Britain is, because now they have the Americans on their side, right? What brought the Americans into the war? The what? The naval attack, and what else? Sorry, Mark. Was it you, Mark?
Yeah, like telegram.
Oh, and the telegram, right? So, okay, let's start with the naval attack. What do we remember about that?
Germany attacked a ship full of passengers.
Yeah.
They hit the wrong ship.
Yeah, or maybe they hit the right ship, or maybe they hit the wrong ship. Yeah, so German submarines had been sinking cargo ships in the Atlantic for years, right? Trying to disrupt the supply chain to the Allies. And so they happened to go ahead here and sink a passenger ship called Lusitania, right? And of course, the American public is unhappy about that, because these are just innocent travelers and vacationers, right? And they get sunk in the Atlantic. The second part was the telegram. And Mark, what was going on with the telegram?
Germany sent a telegram to Mexico and one to US. So British army just decode the telegram and sent back to US, and then US decided to declare war to Germany.
Yeah. So crazy kind of strategic move here. But yeah, the Germans contact the Mexican government and say, hey, if you want to invade the United States and try to take New Mexico and Arizona and Texas, we'll support you in that, right? And of course, as you mentioned, Mark, the British intercept it. They pass it along to the Americans and say, just in case you wanted to know, Germany is trying to slide into Mexico's DMs or whatever. And yeah, it precipitates a war, right? So the U.S. declares war on Germany, and even though they can't get their army ready, they start supplying them. And again, that's really going to be enough to, I think, seal Germany's fate, right? Because again, this is not a war so much of strategy or technology. Well, there's a lot of new technology, but it's really a war of attrition, right? So whoever can outproduce the other one is who's going to win, right? And so eventually Germany is forced to give up. They know that they won't be able to manufacture enough weapons, provide enough supplies, enough soldiers to kind of win this war, especially now that the Americans are in it. And so after a few governmental upheavals, the Germans say, time out, let's have a ceasefire, let's talk it out, right? But talking it out isn't what happens, right? Because in January, all the associated powers here get together to create a peace treaty, but who's not there?
Germany and Russia.
Germany and Russia are not there, right? And for Russia's part, what's Russia doing at the moment?
Building up the community.
Building up the community?
Community.
Yeah, so Russia's just had a revolution in October of 1917. And I think at this time they're still having a civil war. And so they're very distracted with what's going on in their own country. And so they don't really pay attention to what's happening here. We'll get to this, but the Germans are kind of having similar political upheaval in their own country. But as it turns out, they're not going to be invited to this meeting, right? So for a few months, these powers get together and try to kind of figure out a peace treaty, figure out an end to the war. And so as you can see here, there's 32 countries that are present. Canada's one of them. As I mentioned, we got to sit at the adult table, not at the kids table this time, which is a big moment for us. But most of this treaty will be decided by three guys, right? And so we've got Vittorio Orlando from Italy, although he's going to leave early, and David Lloyd George from Great Britain, George Clemenceau with the sort of walrus-like mustache there, and then Woodrow Wilson from the U.S. And so I said yesterday that these three leaders kind of differed in terms of their approach to the treaty. And the question was, should we punish Germany, or should we just simply try to rebuild a stronger Europe, right? And so here, as you can see, George Clemenceau was on the side of punishment, right? And so he wanted very strong punitive measures against Germany. So you can see here, he felt that Germany should actually be split up. Remember we read earlier in the text that in 1870, Germany was actually split up into a bunch of smaller pieces, and then it was united. Clemenceau was saying we should split up Germany again. We should chop it up into a bunch of different places, and that way it will never, be strong enough to cause a problem again. Yeah, he was also looking for severe reparations. He was looking for, Germany to be stripped of all its armed forces so that it couldn't attack anyone. He was pretty clear about wanting to punish Germany for what had happened. Now, I mentioned that David Lloyd George was kind of in the middle, right? He had a foot in one camp. So again, at home, the British public was upset, right? They were happy that they had won the war, but they wanted to punish Germany too, right? Hang the Kaiser, make Germany pay, right? So the British public was very adamant that they should punish Germany. And of course, David Lloyd George wants to get reelected, right? So he wants to do what the people say. But personally, he doesn't think that that's such a good idea, right? He thinks that building a stronger Germany might be more useful, right? And that brings us to Woodrow Wilson, and we said Woodrow Wilson had 14 points, right? He had 14 things that he wanted to accomplish in this war, and he brought that little list to Versailles, right? He brought it and said, "This is what I want to do," and so you can see that he has a reasonably sophisticated approach to this, and he's kind of thought it through. You can see him addressing the causes of the war with his 14 points, right? Initially, we said that what caused World War I? Yes, Archduke shot an ostrich because he was hungry. Yes, the Archduke was killed, but what else started World War I? Germany's quest for power, right? And power over other nations, right? But here, he's saying we should have a principle of national self-determination, right? So you shouldn't have the right to go into another country and take it over because that should belong to that national group, right? What does that principle there, that third bullet point, what other cause of World War I does it address? Nationalism and nationality. Okay, let's rewind. What were the causes of the war? Right? We had a bit of an arms race. People were building more and more and more weapons just because they were afraid of all of the weapons that their next door neighbors were building. So there was militarism. What else? What else caused World War I? Industrialization in part caused it as well, right? That need for raw materials to send home to your factories and produce things from. What else?
Economic self-sufficiency.
Right, so Germany's desire to be economically self-sufficient, right? What else? What's that? Nationalism, right? So in the Balkans, all of those little ethnic groups wanted to be free. They wanted a country of their own, but they were being ruled by either Austria-Hungary or the Ottoman Empire, and they wanted out from under these empires. So nationalism was an issue. What about the alliance system? Right, there were those two alliances, everybody allied with everybody else. So here you can see Wilson addressing those points, right? He's saying, look guys, no more secret treaties, right? Everyone's kind of making quiet backroom deals with everyone else. Open diplomacy, right? If you're going to have an alliance with somebody, everybody should know about it, right? That's important. He says countries must seek to reduce their weapons and their armed forces, right? Weapons that get built often get used, right? So if you don't build them, you can't use them. So Wilson is saying, everybody just decrease your military just so that you can defend yourself, and that's enough, right? Here's this principle of national self-determination. This is the Balkans thing. People of the same nationality should be allowed to govern themselves. They shouldn't be under the control of Austria-Hungary or Germany or anyone else. Right? And then he wants to establish a League of Nations, right? He wants to establish some sort of association that can, that has power over everyone, right? And can sort of tell other states what to do, right? So this is his idea to keep these global conflicts from happening, right? If everyone can unite against one country and say, look, Germany, stop doing this, or whoever it might be, then, that's a way to kind of keep wars from happening, at least in his estimation anyway. Right. So he's got a bunch of other points too. Some of it has to do with freedom of the seas, and there's some other things, but I think these are the big ones. These are the big ones for Woodrow Wilson. Again, these guys hash it out for a few months, and they kind of come up with a compromise that is not entirely satisfactory to anyone, but again, when you have 32 people around the table, hard to come to compromise, right? People have different ideas. It's a tough negotiation. So the agreement is signed mid 1919, and as we mentioned, Germany is not there, right? And so once it's all finished, they basically drop it on the president or the prime minister's desk in Germany and say, sign here, or we are occupying you with our armies, right? So again, there's no negotiation for them, and there's no choice. So you can see here, yeah, it became known as the diktat, the dictated peace, right? Here's what peace means, Germany, sign or else. Here's some other things that came out of this agreement as well. So Poland is kind of created, and it's given access to the sea, okay? And so I think they mentioned in the textbook, there's a city of Danzig, which is a port, and so that allows Poland to kind of access the sea. That's important. These two provinces are given back to France that were taken earlier, Alsace and Lorraine. Germany's going to lose, though. Germany's going to lose all of its overseas colonies. It's going to lose its land because Germany's going to be pushed back into its earlier boundaries. And they're going to make joining Germany and Austria forbidden. Okay, so Germany and Austria are, of course, two different countries. They're two different nationalities. They're pretty close in terms of culturally speaking and linguistically speaking. German and Austrian are pretty similar, right? But they're going to be forbidden from joining, right? Here's how the Treaty of Versailles leaders are going to redraw the map of Europe, right? So you can see here you can see the colored shaded areas are the earlier boundaries, and you can see all of these new countries that are created, right, for the first time. So mostly Austria-Hungary is chopped up into all sorts of different pieces, right? We've got Austria and Hungary, part of Romania and Yugoslavia, which is the Serbs and the Croatians and a bunch of other peoples. We've got a new Poland created. We have a Czechoslovakia created, Czechs and Slovaks together again, just like peanut butter and chocolate. I don't know what I'm talking about. I think it's because I saw your Reese. We've got Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia. Those used to be part of Russia, but they're kind of taken away and created into new countries. Finland up there is brand new. So the map is kind of redrawn by just a few people. And even though the point is to draw these lines according to national, like ethnic boundaries, as it turns out, it doesn't work. Okay? So this is a bit of we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but, Czechoslovakia doesn't exist anymore, right? Right? Huh? Czechoslovakia does not exist, right? Because, again, they wanted every kind of nationalistic group to have its own country, but some got put into they got mixed into a different country anyway. And so we have Czechs and Slovaks that are thrown into a country. Yugoslavia is full of all kinds of different ethnic and religious groups, right? And they're gonna be okay for a while, but they're gonna come apart as well because we don't have a Yugoslavia anymore either, right? So this is kind of an imperfect map, but at the time I suppose it's the best that can be done. You can see here there's a lot of information on this slide, way too much for our purposes. But you can see some areas of Germany that are taken away, right? So these black areas here are given back to, this is Alsace and Lorraine here, they're given back to France. That area over there, which was formerly part of Germany, is going to be given to Poland so that Poland can access the sea. There's going to be a demilitarized zone here along the Rhine River, which I think that is, yeah, demilitarized Rhineland. And so Germany's going to lose territory, they're going to lose colonies, they're going to lose this area here to the west, which is very important for industry, and industry is important for making money. So Germany, whoops. So Germany is going to be kind of economically crippled here a little bit.
But they had fine as well.
They had what? Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Germany is to be, Sophie and Andre, Germany is to be kind of demilitarized as well, right? So you can see that their regular army is going to be reduced to just 100,000 people, and they're going to be kind of stripped of all of their fancy technology, right? Battleships, airplanes, submarines, all of these things have to be handed over or dismantled, right? Of course, I think the treaty called for those things to be handed over to Britain, but I think the Germans just sunk them rather than hand them over to Britain, which is kind of a bit of a middle finger to the Brits, but you know, that's okay. Yeah, so they're just allowed to have an army. That's all they're really allowed to have. And here's the bill, okay? So the Germans are supposed to pay, I'm not sure that
I think it was 33 million.
I think it was 33. I'm not sure where my 6.6 comes from here. Maybe that was the initial payment. I think the initial payment was 6, and then there was the rest of the 33 comes later. But that's a lot of money, right? Even though the war itself cost some 300 billion, Germany is going to be made to pay 33 of it back. Yeah, that's a lot of money, right?
Especially after what they did.
After what, who did?
Like the demilitarization and the lack of industrial area.
Yeah. So they did two things, right? They kind of economically crippled Germany by taking away some of their industrial lands, and then they gave them a big bill to pay, right?
Like, they took Germany's industry so hard and like punished their economy so hard, but how can they come back though?
How can they come back?
People want to, yeah, with a strong and powerful army, like,
They say screw you.
Well,
screw
we'll
the treaty.
we'll get to that. But yeah, you're right. They basically tore up the treaty and said we're not
They just
doing
took
that.
everything back.
Yeah, exactly. But we'll get to that. Right. So, and finally, the one of the things to show up in the treaty was called the war guilt clause. Okay. And so, what that said, well, actually, I'll show you what it said. It said this. So, this is a primary source, by the way. The Allied and associated governments affirm, and Germany accepts, the responsibility of Germany and her allies for causing all the loss and damage to which the Allied and associated governments and their nationals have been subjected as a consequence of the war imposed upon them by the aggression of Germany and her allies. Oof. So what does that mean in just regular speech?
They forced Germany to. They made Germany responsible for everything that happened.
Right. Everything that happened was Germany and their allies, Germany's fault, right? This is all your fault, Germany. But is that true?
I think they could go both ways.
Whose fault is this whole thing? No, he's not even, actually, I was going to say he's not even born, but he is born. He fought in World War I. But whose fault is this? This whole mess. Who do we point the finger at?
The ostrich.
Stupid ostrich, right? Whose fault is this? Everybody? Why? Some kind of what? In some kind of ways, everyone? Why?
No one refused to sit down and talk things out.
True, right? There were
Just
no.
played a big game of chicken.
It was a big game of chicken, right? There were a lot of threats early on. Hey, hey Austria-Hungary, get out of Serbia or else, right? And the Austro-Hungarians were like,
Or what?
yeah, screw you, Russia. What are you going to do about it, right? Nobody stopped to talk. Nobody said, hey, let's sit down and hash it out. Everybody just grabbed all of their weapons and went off to war.
Right or wrong in war. But like history is all written by winners.
Yeah, but those are cliches, right? But even though those are cliches, this is an excellent example of that cliche, right? History is written by the winners, and here the winners are saying that Germany is responsible. That's exactly what they wrote down, right? But again, is it true? I don't know. I don't think so, right? I think everybody has a hand. In fact, when Woodrow Wilson asked the British what their war aims were,
Yeah, they said just to win this.
yeah, they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna win. That's not a reason to go to a war. Like, what are you trying to do here, right? And it's so everybody is at fault, right? This is a communal activity in which everybody has made mistakes and has acted foolishly, right? But again, Germany is going to be made to be responsible, right? I just wanted to remind you, now this is a primary source. What is a primary source?
The original source.
It's original source, but define original for me. From the time, right? It comes to us from the time. And this does, right? This is a little clip of the Treaty of Versailles. This is what was written and signed 122 years ago, almost, right? So this is a primary source. What do we know about primary sources? What should we remember about them? They still can be biased, right? And why? Say that again? Well, yeah. They're. Say that one more time.
It contains the thought or idea of the righteous.
They contain the what of the righteous?
The thought or idea.
Oh, okay. Sorry, the maths are sometimes hard to hear through. That is true, right? That is true. What else should we know about, or should we remember about primary sources? Well, they can be, right? But their accuracy has to be assessed, right? We can't necessarily dismiss a primary source, nor can we believe everything they say, right? We have to see what it's. What's that?
Primary sources are only one side of the story.
They're one side of the story, and we have to assess what they can and can't know, right? So not every primary source knows everything about what was happening at the time. And that primary source might have been created for a specific purpose, right? And it was created for a specific audience, right? And that's going to change what gets said. So, sorry, I guess that's later that I talk about that. Okay, I'll come back to those points in a second. This is a primary source, though. Right, so the American response to this is, well, let me start here. The French's response is kind of disappointment, right? France wanted stronger punishments. It got some punishments, but it didn't get all the ones that it wanted. So France was not entirely happy with the treaty itself. The Americans were, I guess, not happy either. So Woodrow Wilson, for all of his work and his kind of visionary idea about how Europe should be and how the world should be, the U.S. didn't really buy into it. And so he signed it at Treaty of Versailles, but for it to come into effect, he has to bring it back to the U.S. and get Congress to vote and approve it, right? The people of the United States have to say yes to it as well, not just the president. But he brings it back, and they don't sign it. They don't like it. And so it kind of gets put aside, and the Americans just write a short thing with Germany saying, okay, we're not at war anymore. You good? We good? And then they sign it off. So that whole thing of negotiations and all of those things that Woodrow Wilson tried to get in there the American Congress kind of yeah, they kind of rejected it all, which is kind of sad, I think, for Woodrow. But it's also, there's an important point to be made here too. When you think of the United States, now or in the recent future, what do you think of? Like, what is the United States like? What are they like?
Power control.
Right? They're very powerful, right? They have a lot of global power or global control, right? What else?
Influence.
Yeah, they have a lot of influence, right, in other countries, and they often stick their nose in other countries' business, right? Sometimes for good and sometimes not so much. But they're kind of everywhere. They're in everyone's business. They're kind of the global policeman. They've got a lot of power and influence around the world, right? That's the United States we know. But in 1919, that's not the United States that we have. The United States in this period is much more isolationist. Okay, so they're kind of doing their own thing. They are, their economy is going quite well. They are rather wealthy, and their economy is fairly strong, but they're not really that interested in getting involved in everyone else's business. And so even in World War I, there was a pretty major conflict going on in Europe for 3 years, right? And the U.S. was happy to sell weapons to Britain and France, but did they get involved? No, they're like, that's a European thing, right? Like, good luck. We hope it turns out all right over there, but we're busy, right? So, and again, that's not the America we know today, right? The America we know today is like, we're in there, right? And they march in with their weapons and start. It's like what? Yeah, yeah. It's before they're much more kind of, yeah. It's a business. War is a business, but not even so much for them right now. So again, this is not the United States that we're used to. This is one that's kind of, they're minding their own business. Yeah, they'll do business with you and help you out, but they're not really running around the world, sticking their military into other countries. It's not where we are yet. So Congress says no, right? They say no to that, and they don't join the League of Nations, which is another thing. So this is the kind of forerunner to the United Nations that we know now, and the U.S. doesn't join. They're like, no, we're not interested in that. Germany's response is a little different. Okay, so Germany was kind of hoping for something that was closer to what Woodrow Wilson was offering or trying to push for, because Woodrow didn't want to punish Germany, right? He thought that a weak Germany was a bad idea, right? Even though, this Germany was just involved in the war, crippling Germany was a bad idea, right? And a strong Germany would be less likely to create trouble than a weak one. But again, Woodrow didn't really get his way entirely. It was a negotiation. And so the Germans were kind of unhappy with the treaty. They were unhappy with the fact that they didn't even get to negotiate it. They definitely did not like having to take responsibility for the war, right? They didn't like that war guilt clause. They did not agree with the territorial losses. They didn't agree with the reparations they had to pay. Yeah, so they didn't like any of it, right? And probably that's no surprise, because they weren't included, right? They didn't get to argue their point. They were just like, here, sign this. And nobody likes that, right? So here is another primary source. This appeared in a German newspaper. You can see here, Deutsche Zeitung. I can't speak German, as you probably figured out. What's that?
Deutsche Zeitung.
Deutsche Zeitung.
Zeitung.
Okay. So yeah, June 28th. So this is the day that the Treaty of Versailles was signed. And so yeah, vengeance, German nation. Today in the Hall of Mirrors, that's in Versailles, big hall, the disgraceful treaty is being signed. Do not forget it. The German people will regain their place amongst the nations to which they are entitled. Then will come vengeance for the shame of 1919.
Well, they have
Yeah. Sounds like they're cool, right? Sounds like they're okay. Yeah, clearly not, right? And this is the day it's signed, right? So, like from the first second, the Germans are upset, right? Germans are annoyed. So, this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Primary sources. They come from the time in question, but as Sophie mentioned, they have bias, right? They are biased in some way, which is again that's not a problem. It's just that we have to understand the bias, right? We have to understand what these sources can tell us and what they can't. And so here, primary sources don't know everything, right, from the time period. They know certain things and they don't know other things. They create their content for an audience and they create their content for a reason, right? So we have to understand those things, right? What they know and what they don't know, why they're creating this source, and who's their audience, who are they creating it for. So in this case, in this case, who's creating this source? Who is it? Yeah, a newspaper author, right? We don't have a specific author listed, but it shows up in a German newspaper. Okay. Who's their audience? German people, right? So I'm sure other people could read it, but it's mostly for the German people, this newspaper. Why are they producing this source? What is the purpose of this? Mm-hmm. Right? So there's an informational aspect to this, right? Just so you know, the treaty has been signed. But what else?
Encouraging
To
to like not be afraid about the treaties or the future.
they're encouraging people not to they're encouraging people to sorry, I was just distracted. Can you say that again, Mark?
Like encouraging the people not to like be afraid of the future and the treaties.
Right. So there's an idea, don't be afraid of the future or the treaty, right? So there's an information aspect to this, but there's also, they're trying to convince people of something. What are they trying to convince them of? To not be afraid? What else?
The treaty is not good.
Yeah, the treaty is BS, right? This thing is ridiculous. And what else are they trying to convince people of?
Will come for revenge.
Yeah, right? Vengeance will come, right? The Germans will get their revenge, right? So, okay, so we know what they're trying to say. We know who they're saying it to. Why do you think the newspaper printed this? To show the message? Yes. Why did they print this specific message?
They already have passed it over for the legal nation.
Maybe they do.
Maybe Hitler.
They weren't a member of the League of Nations for a while. It took them until 1926 or 7, I think, to be admitted.
I think it was funny.
Yeah. So it took them a few years to be admitted to the league. Why else might they have published this?
So not for this. Like, and then
Yeah, they don't want people to forget the sort of anger and the fact that they got screwed, right? They got screwed over in this, and they want people to know it and remember it, right? So there is, whoever wrote this, there is a little bit of personal opinion, right? And it's probably shared by quite a number of Germans, but this is the personal opinion of this individual, right? That, we got We got the shaft, right? We got screwed over in this, and we should remember that. Here, here's another source for you. There's a longer one, sorry. I'm not going to read it to you because that would be a lot, but do you want me to read it to you?
No.
Okay. No, I'm going to have to do it. Okay. But even after the defeat in 1918, many Germans, especially those who had played leading parts in the political and economic life up to 1918, preserved a political and historical image of themselves which was colored by illusions. Interesting. Because the German army on the Western Front had held to the last hour an unbroken defensive front outside the frontiers of the Reich and had marched home in order, these people failed to understand that Germany had been defeated. Thus, the idea took root and spread that the cause of the collapse of Germany was not her own policy or exhaustion in the face of the enemy army, but a stab in the back from the front. Stab in the back behind the front. Oh, that's weird. The accusation was eventually leveled against the Weimar democracy that had been forced to accept the dictated Treaty of Versailles owing to a treachery at home. Okay, so this is a secondary source, right? This is a historian writing this. But what are they saying? Right? So, hang on. Let me back up. What's a secondary source? Yeah, it's something that maybe a historian would write. They look at primary sources and they create something else, right? They create a source that tells the story, right? What else should we remember about secondary sources? Well, maybe, but yeah, it does have its own kind of bias, right? It's trying to convince you of something. It's trying to make an argument saying this thing is true, right? Or this is what really happened. What else should we remember about primary sources?
You could also have bias to something.
Yeah, they could also be biased. And why is that? I'll give you a hint. It's the same reason as the primary sources. Because why are secondary sources, how can they be biased?
Because maybe they also come from newspaper company, so like they have some kind of particular they're supporting some kind of like parties or something like Fox News or NBC.
Sure, they may have they have a point to prove, but they may have biases of their own, right? They might be very right wing or very left wing or very pro-German or very anti-German. What else?
The target audience.
Yeah, who is the audience? Who is this written for? Right? Who is supposed to be reading or consuming this? And the third part? Or did we say it already? Maybe we said it already. Let me check. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, again, like Sophie said, they're produced after the time period in question. They're produced from primary sources. They have their own little bias, right? The author is trying to convince you of something. They're creating their content for an audience, and they're creating their content for a reason, right? And again, none of that is bad because all of us have bias, all of us have audiences, and all of us say what we say for a reason, right? There's nothing bad there. We just have to understand what it is, right? So, in the case of this one, who's the audience, do you think? What's that? Well, he's the author. Yeah, so he's a German historian. So who's the audience?
Germany.
Right? Germans, but maybe even wider than that. If he's a historian, Yeah, to the whole world, or maybe at least to the whole academic world, right? To people who are interested in history, Franz Fischer is going to try to convince you of something, and that's okay. We know who he is, right? We know he's a German historian. I don't know if that really makes him super biased in this case. Maybe it does. Why did he write this, do you think? What do you think his purpose is to... Actually, let's press pause on that question and now go back to the question of what does this actually say in kind of regular... What would be a good short summary of what Franz is saying here? Fritz is saying.
It's showing that Germany has been defeated. He's trying to say this.
Yeah, Germany is defeated, but what about the reasons for Germany's defeat?
Kind of altered the story a bit.
He kind of what?
He altered the story a bit.
Well, he did, and he's making an argument that some people believed one thing, but it actually was something else, right? So we said a little earlier on that Germany was basically running out of supplies, right?
He says they had supplies.
Yeah. Well, no, but he's saying a little bit different. He's saying that he's saying this. So, because the German army on the Western Front kind of just marched home, they weren't defeated, right? Like the army didn't, overwhelm the German lines and take them all captive and plant the flag on Germany. That never happened, right? There was a ceasefire, there was a timeout, and then the soldiers on the front in Germany said, "Okay, you guys, come on home. Fighting's done. We're good," right? So, in their mind, they didn't really lose, right? In their mind, they were successful. They held the army at bay until the end, and then they went home. So they didn't really feel like they lost. But we know that, again, Germany was going to run out of resources, right, very soon, and they weren't capable of kind of extending the war effort much further. We read the other day that they tried to get to Paris, to take Paris, and they couldn't even get there, right? They ran out of men and supplies. And so the government said, "Hey, we're going to be out of resources here. Let's call it, right? Let's negotiate, let's talk." But for the Germans, they didn't feel that they lost. But then here comes a treaty that says, not only did you lose, because we're not even going to negotiate with you, not only did you lose, but here's all the stuff you have to pay back. And by the way, it's your fault. Whole thing is your fault, right? And so the Germans are not only annoyed, but there's this idea that they never were defeated in the first place, right? And yet, they're on the losing end of the treaty, are they not? Yeah, they're screwed, right? They totally got screwed in this thing. So, how did that happen? How did they wind up losing a war that they didn't lose? It's a conspiracy, right? They must have been stabbed in the back. It must have been their own government who sold them out, right? And so some people were actually accusing the Weimar government of basically stabbing Germany in the back, of surrendering when in fact they weren't going to lose. And so yeah, there's this, again, it's almost a conspiracy theory, right? It's almost like, Donald Trump claiming that the election was stolen, right? The election was stolen, there was massive fraud. Was there? Maybe? Has anyone seen any evidence?
It's not kind of evidence, but like you will see something strange, but there's no evidence, so maybe you don't know.
You don't know, right? And with no evidence, what can we do, right? We'll talk about that later. Yeah, what can you do, right? With no evidence, you can claim anything you want, right? I can fly, right? I know you've never seen me fly, but trust me, right? Without evidence, What can we do, right? So here we have a similar thing happening, right? So Donald Trump spread around this idea that, oh, the whole election was rigged, the Democrats rigged it, and now I've lost, right? And so the Democrats are trying to take over the country or whatever the story is. And here you have a similar kind of rumor, right? Here you have the idea that, oh, our government stabbed us in the back and surrendered Germany when, Germany was, we were going to win, we were still strong, right? And that's not true. Germany was not still strong. They were going to go down eventually. But their leaders just said, okay, we can't win, we're out, right? Let's talk. So again, you have this kind of thing showing up, right? This idea that the government was to blame for their loss, but it's not true. But people said it anyway, right? And so, and people, people like this, right? People who wrote this thing in the newspaper were maybe propagating that idea that in fact they were, that they were betrayed by their government. And in fact they weren't. The government had what choice do you have, right? When they put a peace treaty on your desk and say, look, our tanks are rolling in unless you sign this, you don't really have a lot of choice, do you? No. And so, yeah, this is an interesting source because again, it's useful to talk about as a secondary source, but also it contains a similar situation to a modern parallel, right? A modern parallel where this sort of alternate conspiracy theory is circulated, and people are like, oh, we were taken advantage of, we were screwed over, we were, stabbed in the back by our own government, right? And again, they weren't. The poor Weimar government had was just barely hanging on at the time, and it's not the truth, right? But again, many people felt that way anyway, right? And again, they felt that way because Germany didn't really lose. They sort of called a ceasefire before their defeat. Does that make sense? Is that yeah? Okie dokie. Let's take a little break, and when we come back, we'll switch gears a little bit, okay? We'll do something different. Okay. Okay, yeah, let me just, right, so good German historian, right. Okay, so we're gonna leave World War I for just a few minutes here because I want to talk about, I want to do a little thing about critical thinking. And so some of you, if you're in my other class, you may have heard this kind of thing before, but that's okay. It's a way in which the curriculums overlap, so you know the same skills are taught in different courses. So it may seem like a bit of a redo, but it, you know, that's okay. It's worth going over again. So, where's my button here? Right. I'm sure we've probably all heard of critical thinking, but to your mind, and if you haven't talked about this with me already, what do you think of when you think of critical thinking? What does it mean to you? Thinking outside the box?
Thinking on the spot.
Thinking on the spot, okay.
Like think about different perspectives.
Thinking about different perspectives, yep, okay, good. Yeah. What else?
Tackling different situations.
What's that?
Tackling different situations.
Tackling different situations, okay. It's kind of this idea of like mental flexibility, right? Being able to kind of, you know, take different ideas and concepts and kind of juggle them around, right? And think about them on the spot and on the fly, outside of the box. Actually, Andre, when you said that, there was a little part of me that was like, oh, because I always cringe when people say think outside the box, because it's such a, like, what does it mean to think outside the box? What does that mean?
All that they say together.
What's that?
All they say together.
All they say together?
All what they say together.
Oh, all what they say together? Oh, okay. I had a different idea of what it meant. What does it mean?
Thinking in a different manner.
Yeah, thinking in a different manner, thinking differently, thinking like different than everybody else, or trying to get out of your own normal way of seeing things, right? But so okay, so that's thinking outside the box. But then that term, thinking outside the box, that's kind of a cliche, right? That's a thing that people say a lot, and so I find it weird to like describe this process of thinking differently by using a cliche and saying like the exact same thing that everyone else says, because it's like the opposite. The opposite of thinking outside the box is like using a cliche. You know what I'm saying? So it's like every time I hear someone say it, I'm like, oh, but it's okay. But you're right. You're absolutely right. You do want to, you know, you want to escape your regular way of thinking about things. So I know I'm kind of, but you're very correct. You're very correct. Yeah, so I think this is a good start, and I'm going to add a little bit to it. When we talk about critical thinking, we're talking about the things that we believe to be true. And I think these are important to talk about, because the things that we believe to be true are, you know, really what guide us through the world, right? And we talked about that in social justice just this morning, right? We talked about societal beliefs, right? Things that society believes to be true. And what could be more powerful than something that an entire group of people, maybe thousands, maybe millions of people, believe to be true? What could be more powerful than that? Right? And so I think it's important that, you know, we take those beliefs and we examine them carefully, right? Because some of them very well may be worth believing, right? And some of them may not, right? And we talked about one of them earlier, right? The idea that the election had been stolen, right? In the United States, there was massive electoral fraud, right? That's an important belief. And if people believe that, there will be consequences for that, right? It is significant that people believe it, right? It is, yeah, it's an idea that is big enough that we should pay careful attention to whether or not it is true. And clearly, I've already kind of tipped my hand. You know how I feel about that idea. But that's a big idea, right? That's a big belief, and it is worth questioning carefully to make sure that if we're going to believe it, that it is actually true, right? Because again, beliefs that are correct and true. Sophie, I was just apologizing for this because you'll have heard this before, but that's okay. You can help out. Beliefs that are true can kind of guide us on, a good path, right? A path that, has good outcomes for us. But I think there are consequences for believing things that are untrue, right, or unproductive. And so we need the tools to figure out which are which, right? And so that's where critical thinking comes in. Not so much what we believe, but how we go about thinking and how we go about testing those ideas and figuring out if we should believe them or not, okay? So here's how it works. Very simple. We can really only think critically about things that people are claiming to be true, okay? Or saying that things are or are not a certain way. So we can't think critically about questions, right? So is there a God? I don't know, right? You can't really think critically because it's not a statement, right? There is a God, right? Or there is no God, right? Either one of those is a clear statement that we can start to pull apart and think critically about. Questions are, kind of just floating in the air, right? They're worth thinking about, but it's hard to really critically assess them because they're just kind of open, right? So somebody needs to actually say something is a certain way or isn't a certain way, okay? Now what we're going to be looking at here are arguments, and arguments are important. And of course I don't mean, bickering arguments about, who left the toilet seat up or whatever people argue about, I don't know. Not those kind of arguments, but arguments that are trying to convince you of something. And we were just talking about that with the excerpt from that historian, I keep wanting to say Franz, FRITZ FISCHER, right? He was trying to argue something, right? He was trying to convince us that, in fact, some of the German public had been misled, right? They thought that, the government had stabbed them in the back, when in fact that wasn't true, right? Germany was bound to win the war, and the government just said, okay, we're tapping out here, right? But so the historian was making an argument, and arguments are important for all kinds of different fields. And I don't know that I can guarantee too much because I can't tell the future, but I guarantee you will use arguments in your future life, in your future work, right? Arguments are important for academics. If you go into university, you'll write papers that will need an argument in them. If you become an academic, you will need to write journal articles that have arguments in them. If you become a lawyer, you will deal in arguments all day long, right? If you get into sales and you're selling, cars to people, you might need to be able to create an argument why this person should buy this car and why they should buy it from you and not, the guy down the street, right? You might need a raise from your boss and you just can't ask for more money. You need an argument, right? You should pay me more money, Mr. Boss or Ms. Boss, and here's why, right? You need to be able to create an argument, and an argument that is strong, that is sound, right? So, that said, arguments are just statements. They're collections of statements. They have a conclusion that is the main thing that they want us to believe, and then they have premises, things that support that conclusion. Okay? Cool so far? Okay. I'm going to provide you with a simple argument that we can talk about as an example. It's not a perfect argument, but it's enough to work with. Okay? So here, that is a cat. That is in fact my cat. That's my cat Sesame. She currently lives with my parents, but she lived with me for about 7.5 years or so. She's very nice and very social. Here she's kind of having a lazy afternoon, which she usually does. But I'm going to make an argument about cats. Okay? Cool so far? All right. Bye, Sesame. Okay. So, this is my argument. The conclusion is that cats make better pets than dogs. Okay? Now, I know some people are going to immediately agree with this conclusion. Some people are immediately going to disagree with this conclusion. But as good critical thinkers, we're not going to do that. Okay? We're not going to jump to the end. We're going to say, okay, the first question we're going to ask, as always, is, well, why should we believe that? Why should we believe that cats make better pets than dogs? Okay? So I'm going to offer you 3 premises, okay? 3 reasons that you should believe that cats are better pets than dogs. So here's my first premise. My first premise is that they are inexpensive to feed and to maintain, okay? So Sesame eats little tins of food about this big. She probably eats about 3 in a day. And if I am careful and I buy them on sale, they cost about 50 cents each. So she costs about $1.50 a day to feed, okay? She doesn't really require that much else. I have to buy her cat litter every now and again. But for the most part, that's all she needs, right? That's what she needs. So that's my premise. She is inexpensive. Second premise, you don't have to take them out multiple times a day, right? So anyone who's ever had a dog will know that that dog probably has to pee and poo at least as much as you do. And so you're going to be going out multiple times to get this dog to go, unless you want them going in your house, which I'm going to assume you do not, right? And that doesn't even include walks, right? So you've got to get walkies in later, but you've got to get them out a number of times. My third premise is this, that they are, in fact, loving animals that will improve the quality of your life just by having them in the house with you. Okay? So, simple argument. I've got 1 conclusion and 3 premises. Now, again, you may instinctively agree or disagree with me based on your experiences, but I'm going to ask you to press pause on that for a moment while we logically evaluate this argument. Okay? So what we want to do when we evaluate an argument, any argument on anything at all, is 2 steps. There's more, but let's start with 2. First of all, do the premises logically support the conclusion? So in this case, what I want to know is, are my premises logical support? Are they reasons why someone might prefer cats to dogs as pets? Okay? That's what we're going to do. Then we're going to look at whether these premises are true or not, but one thing at a time, okay? So let's look at logical support. So cats make better pets than dogs, and the first premise is because they are inexpensive to feed and maintain. Now, is that a reason why someone might choose a cat over a dog?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Again, it doesn't have to be 100%. It doesn't have to, some people don't care about the money. Sure, fine. But is that a reason why someone might choose a cat over a dog? Yeah, right? Especially if it's a big dog and those things eat like pounds of food a day, and good Lord. I had a friend who had a Labrador Retriever, and she was feeding it raw food. So it was she was feeding it like it was actual meat. So it wasn't like the dry dog food. Oh my God, it was expensive. Like this dog was eating more meat than I ever ate. And so anyway, okay. Second premise, you don't have to take them out multiple times a day. Is that a reason why someone might choose a cat over a dog? Yes, right? Some people, again, might not care. Some people might like the excuse to get outside all the time. Sure. But is this a reason why someone might choose a cat over a dog? Third one, my premise here is that they are loving animals that improve their owner's quality of life. Now, is that a reason why someone might choose a cat? Because it might improve their quality of life. Yeah, right? And I think we could probably all intuitively agree that pets kind of do that, right? They do improve the quality of your life. So, okay, I've got all logical support for my conclusion, Are my premises true? Let's start with this one. Are cats less expensive to feed and maintain than dogs? Is that true? You think yes? Dogs have to eat. Okay. It probably, now this, it might depend on the size of your dog, right? You guys have seen those tiny little dogs. I imagine they don't eat that much. I have no idea how much they eat. I imagine they don't eat a lot. So maybe if you have a really tiny dog, but are most dogs bigger than cats? They are, right? So I would imagine that most dogs are going to eat more than cats do. What about maintenance costs? Do you think dogs are more expensive to maintain or less?
Generally, they are.
Yeah? Yeah, like what other things do you need for dogs?
Toys.
You need chew toys and treats and a leash and those poop bags because you can't just let your dog poop all over the place. You got to pick it up.
Grooming as well.
Grooming, maybe. Yeah, if you've got a long-haired dog, right? Maybe you have to take them for a shampoo if you can't wash them in your house. Okay, so is that first premise true? Yeah, right? There might be places where it might be more comparable. If you have one of those tiny little yappy dogs, maybe it's more similar. But certainly if you have a large dog, the costs are going to be quite a bit different, right? Okay, so my first premise is true. Good, good, good. You don't have to take them out multiple times a day. Is that true? Yeah, that's pretty true, right? Cats don't have to go out at all. They have a litter box. Dogs, like you can train them to go inside, but I don't think you really want that. They don't do it naturally. You know, it takes a lot of work, and I don't. First few months, well, yeah, you've got to train them not to go in the house, right? But I think that's pretty true, right? Pretty true. Okay, so third premise: they are loving animals that improve their owner's quality of life. Is that true? Okay, so true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that cats are better than dogs, right? Do dogs improve their owner's quality of life? Yeah. Do you think dogs are better at that than cats?
Yeah, actually.
Cats are not social, not all cats, but dogs are more social than in general.
Right. They definitely are, right?
So cats are always like mad and playing. They just lays around all day.
How dare you? Well, I was gonna say Sesame does. She does laze around all day. It's true, right? There's some level of difference. Certainly, cats have a reputation for being a little bit stuck up, right? A little bit snobby. They don't like to interact with just anyone. Dogs definitely will interact with most people. Yeah, so cats will love you in a different way, right? Dogs will jump all over you and lick your face. Some people don't like that though. So what do you think about this premise? Is it true?
It is true, but like it's not enough for debating cat is better than dog.
Yeah.
It's way too general.
Too general, right? So it's true of cats, but it's true of many other animals as well, right? Some people are wild about their birds, right? I don't get birds, but some people love their birds. So who am I to say, right? If a bird improves someone's quality of life, fantastic. Okay, so this premise is true, but maybe it's not as strong support, right? Because it might be a reason someone might choose to have a cat, but not necessarily a cat over a dog. Can you help me maybe create another premise that might be stronger? Cats don't snitch? Like how? What do you mean by snitch?
Yeah, like when you bring someone over, they just start barking like man.
Yeah, they bark.
And then your mom wakes up in the middle of the night.
Oh, okay. I
Cats
see.
keep quiet, stay quiet.
Yeah, so if you are trying to sneak into your own house or sneak someone into your house, your dog will give you away. Your cat will barely care. Right? Okay. Now, I don't know how many people that applies to in this room or generally, but okay.
Even at the airport.
Even at the airport?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, that's only a plane, not booking.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, dogs will tell you if you have drugs on you, but cats don't care. I read an article somewhere that they were actually they were trying to get cats to do it too, because I think cats' sense of smell is just as good as dogs, to be honest.
Just like fall asleep or something.
Well,
On the job.
and I think that was the problem, is that cats, you can't motivate cats, like, because dogs want to please you, right? They want you to, to like them and to tell them that they're a good boy or a good girl. Cats don't care, right? So
I read somewhere that dogs, they see you as they know you're their owner.
Yeah.
And then cats, they just see you as like a bigger, weird shaped cat, So they see you as like a roommate.
Mine definitely does. I'm the bigger, weird looking roommate. Yeah.
So let's agree that dogs are not social and dogs are social. So that's also.
As I say, it does depend. Sesame is much more social than I thought cats were. So I thought cats were, they don't care about anyone. They just do their own thing and they ignore you. But she doesn't. She's very like interested in people, and she would, when I brought her over to my parents' house and we'd have dinner, and then after dinner we'd sit at the table and just kind of talk, and she'll actually jump up and sit right in the middle of the table so that she's part of the conversation, right? She wants to be right there. So yeah, there's differences, right? But yeah, I think you're right in general, for sure. Maybe one more. I think that's a reasonably good one, Andre, but I don't know that it applies to everybody.
I think generally cats require less attention than dogs. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Dogs could get depressed.
okay. So for people who maybe don't have a huge amount of time to dedicate to the pet, then cats may make a better choice, because they can be left alone for longer and they won't get depressed or anxious or whatever. Okay, I think that's more general than trying to sneak around and your dog ratting you
A
out.
lot of times.
I know. Okay, that's a good one too. But can we say that with that combination, do I have a logically sound argument? Yeah, not bad, right? Not bad. It's not perfect, it's not ironclad, but my premises logically support my conclusion, and they are, intuitively true, or probably mostly true, right? For the first one, maybe I might have to do some math, right? Do a little bit of research to actually figure out what the costs are. I think it's probably correct, though. Number 2 is definitely true, right? We know that to be the case. And number 3 is, well, maybe that's a personal preference one. But again, if you have a limited time, or if you're outside of the home for long parts of the day, yeah, maybe the choice of a cat might be a better choice than a dog for you, maybe. Okay. Let me just add one more premise in here. Okay, one more premise. So cats make better pets than dogs. Cats make better pets than dogs. And the reason why you should believe that is because in ancient Egypt, cats were revered as gods.
Yeah, that's also
Yeah, that is true, is it not?
But I don't think it applies
Yes. But is that a reason why someone might get a cat?
No.
Probably. Maybe.
if you're Egyptian.
Yeah, maybe if you're Egyptian or if you're like really into like ancient Egypt kind of stuff, maybe. But for most people,
No.
nah. It's true. It's a fun little factoid, but it's not logical support for this conclusion, right? So it's not a good premise for that reason. It's not a reason why someone might choose a cat, right? Okay, so I've got a logical sound argument here. My premises are mostly true. Let me ask you this. Now, even if you agreed that this is a good argument, does that mean you have to believe it?
No.
Why not?
At the end of the day, like pets is all down to personal preference in the end.
Okay. So what might cause you, if I made this argument to you, Ben, or to anyone, what might cause you to say no? What might cause you to say no, I'm not going to choose a cat? Dogs are what? Okay, maybe, okay, that's good. Maybe you might say, well, okay, Mike, this is a logical, sound argument that you have, but I need a little more love than a cat can provide, right? Cats are a little, dogs, shower you with their love, right? Where cats are kind of like, yeah, you're okay. That's,
Dogs are more loyalty.
right, dog. So yeah, so what if you kind of want that kind of love from your pet, right? You want the kind of love from your pet that when you come home, they will like leap into your arms and knock you over and lick your face, right? If that's really what you want, a cat is not going to do that for you, right? At least I don't think so. So yeah, you might want a particular kind of pet experience that cats don't provide. Why else might you say no to this argument, even though it's logically sound? I'll give you a hint. Achoo!
Oh, the shade.
Yeah, what if you're allergic to cats, right? What's that?
You can also get, there's a 50% chance they're allergic, either cats or dogs.
True, right? So some people are allergic to cats, some to dogs, some to both, right?
Some don't care.
Yeah, but if you were allergic to cats, I could make the best argument ever, right? And you'd say, well, okay, you have a sound argument, Mike, but can't do it because I will die if there's a cat in my house, right? I'll never stop sneezing and I'll claw my eyes out because they're so itchy, right? So that might be a reason why you might say no. Any other reason? Other reasons why you might reject my argument?
I still like the idea of walking the dog.
Yeah.
I won't get very good cat, so I'll still go with the dog.
Sure. So maybe your lifestyle is one that's more outdoorsy, right? Maybe you like to get out and walk around and go hiking, and maybe you'd like to take your pet with you. And is the cat gonna do that?
No.
Unlikely. I know there's some Instagram accounts where this, somebody's got like their cat in a parka, behind them, and they're like hiking through the mountains, and okay, sure, but that's like 1 in a million cats, right?
That's different because the dog is actually like walking with you.
Yeah.
Whereas you're carrying the cat.
Yeah. Very true. So
It's a different experience, I guess.
it's a different experience, yeah. So and if that's kind of your lifestyle and that's the experience that you want, then the cat's not for you, right? The cat will not do that stuff with you like that, right? Other reasons why you might reject my argument?
I'm just a dog person.
Well, yeah, and that's what this is, right? Is a lot of this particular argument comes down to personal preference, right? Is there a right answer? Is there a universal right answer to which is better? No, right? It depends on a lot of things. It depends on your lifestyle, your allergies, might depend on whether your building allows pets or allows dogs or allows cats. It might, have to do with, it has to do with it might have to do with your budget, how much money you have, all kinds of things, right? So I can make you an argument here, and a logically sound one, but it's difficult to, it's easily dismissible, right? Because a lot of this is down to preference and experience, right? And if you want, that dog experience, and money is of no object, and you're not allergic to dogs, then the dog is the pet for you, right? And it's interesting. I got her. I'm going to put her back on the screen. She's living with my parents now, so I kind of miss her. So I'm going to put her back up there. So yeah, when I got her, I kind of went through this very thing, that I had a small apartment. I used to live in Edmonton, Alberta, which is very cold in the winter, and so I didn't want to go out 5 times a day in -20, right? And I had a small apartment. I didn't have enough room for a dog. And I was out. I was working and I was going to school. And so I didn't have a lot of time for the dog. And so, yeah, for me, I thought the cat was the better choice. And she was, right? She absolutely was. But, yeah, so this is a simple argument that one could construct. And we could construct them about any number of topics. Those of you who are in my social justice class or others will know that I also have a coffee argument that I use. It's really simple as well, right? And you can build these arguments on just about anything, right? Which I will ask you to do, but not now, because that's all the time we have. So come back tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about this critical thinking thing. Probably not about Sesame. Her 15 minutes of fame is now over. And we'll talk about some other history stuff. I forget what. But until then, you can pack it up, and I'll see you tomorrow, okay?